So here we go. Module 1, Review of the Guiding Principles. In this module, you were going to see some reminders and some information that you may have seen in the Guiding Principles training that was led by Dr. Paige Davis. And if you went to the face-to-face, also Dr. Shannon Middleton. But in this module, we're going to just review and make sure you're dusting off that information you learned either in the face-to-face or the online Guiding Principles training. And I want to challenge you to think about how this might be applied in your daily practice. So either in your lesson planning or thinking about getting ready for your review with the teacher growth rubric in the professional growth system. So you're going to hear from Dr. Paige Davis in the next slides, and then I'll come back with a few reminders and things at the end of the module.
As we get started on this journey to explore universal design for learning, I want to start with a foundational understanding of what UDL is and why it's so important to our educational practices. To set the stage, I have a fantastic video featuring Dr. Katie Novak, a leading expert in the field of UDL. In this video, Katie provides a clear overview of UDL, explaining its principles and the impact it can have on both teaching and learning. As you watch, I encourage you to think about how the concepts she discusses might relate to your own experiences in your classroom. Consider the barriers you've encountered in engaging your students, presenting information, and assessing their learning.
I get asked all the time, why are we going to implement UDL? And here's my short answer. All schools must design learning that works for all learners. We spend so much time designing lessons and prepping and assessing. And here's the thing, despite our intent and despite our best efforts, we are not meeting the needs of all students because students are wildly different from one another. And when we embrace the variability that students bring, their identities, their differences academically, behaviorally, socially, emotionally, linguistically, we recognize that one-size-fits-all learning simply does not work. Our systems have not traditionally met the needs of all of our students, which is why we have to design universally for every single one of our students. And this requires that we move away from one-size-fits-all thinking. We can do better for all kids when we provide multiple ways for students to learn, materials for them to use, and opportunities for them to share what they know. So if you are so frustrated with spending a ton of time planning and only having some students be successful, definitely dive more deeply into the framework of UDL, which provides you with a framework and specific strategies for planful, iterative design that makes sure that student voice and choice are at the forefront of standards-based grade level instruction that holds all of our brilliant scholars to the highest of expectations.
So why UDL? Well, it's the only named instructional practice in the Every Student Succeeds Act. And it's mentioned in some pretty important educational legislation as a best practice for instructional delivery models. It's incorporated in the National Education Technology Plan, the ESSA, the Higher Education Opportunity Act, and the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act. The reason that UDL is mentioned so often is because the research supporting it is strong and there are numerous benefits for students. UDL is also aligned with your Mississippi Teacher Growth Rubric. That's your evaluation instrument. It facilitates student self-regulation in at-home virtual learning and promotes a proactive model of inclusion. So let's take a look at this one-size-fits-all comic. There's a few characters standing outside the window, and we wonder how many of these guys are going to look great in clothing from this store. And what else do we notice about this scenario? And I'll point out a few things that people from previous trainings have said about this comic. They say, well, for one, nobody is going to look great. I don't know how many of you have ever tried on one size fits all clothing, but it's pretty much one size fits no one clothing, because somebody's going to have short pants, somebody in this group is going to have tight pants, and some of those guys right there have no legs, and they're not going to, nothing's going to work for them. Some other things I've heard about this comic are that's why they're having a sale. They can't give that stuff away. And other people have said none of those guys are even going into the store. They know better. And then other people have said, look how different they all are. And this company still thinks that one size is going to fit all of them. And so the point of this comic in a lot of the UDL trainings that I've been to is to help us remember that one size lesson, one style of lesson is probably not going to hit many students. One type of presentation or one type of materials is likely not going to hit a whole lot of students. We have a misconception in education sometimes that average means most commonly occurring, and it does not. For example, the CDC tells us that the average American man over 20 years old is 5'9", he weighs 197 pounds, and he has a 40-inch waist. What we know, though, is that the most commonly occurring waist size in America is 34 inches. If we took the data from those averages and stores bulk purchased 40-inch waist pants and only carried those in store, everyone else outside of a 40-inch waist had to special order their pants. Everyone would have a problem except those 40-inch waists. It's very similar to what we do to students in the classroom. We present with a certain type of presentation, we offer certain materials, and if you are average, you're good. If you're not, if you're on this end of gifted, if you're on that end of special education, you're not good. You have to request something different, just like anyone who's not a 40-inch waist. The Center for Applied Special Technology began its work in 1984 with a focus on how computer technology could enhance instruction for students with learning disabilities. So these research scientists at the Center for Applied Special Technology got together and started designing instructional tools for students with disabilities. And what they found out was there are 3 learning networks in the brain that activate when students learn. So they started researching those in the context of learner variability. They started studying all of the different types of learners in the classroom and what types of barriers or things that are getting in the way of learners receiving information. Something you'll hear a lot in UDL is learner variability. And that means that there's going to be a lot of variation in the students that you have, the way they learn, the way they interact with materials, the way they perceive things, and the way they express themselves. And that's because each human brain has this unique pattern of activity that occurs when learning is happening. They have what is called jagged learning profiles. This is not to be confused with interest inventories and learning styles inventories. That's because as the context or subject changes, this variation changes within that profile. That means that a student may not score as high in curiosity or vocabulary during art as they do during science. I may have high language scores during art class, but then when I go into science class, my language scores may be really low. I may have really high curiosity during science, but if I don't have the background knowledge to support that, I may have really low language or really low knowledge. Now that we know there's no such thing as an actual average student, and we also know that how much variability exists within students and within our classroom, we know it doesn't really serve us to teach to the average. And when we do that, we're only hitting about 68% of the class, and that's not really acceptable. We're missing a lot of students that way. We really have to change our aim so that we reach the margins more. In this video I've posted here, Shelley Moore again does a great job of explaining her perspective on a 7-10 bowling split and how that applies to the classroom.
Hi, my name is Shelley Moore, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. As Canadians, we have a reputation for finding and embracing the strength in our diversity. This value, however, hasn't been reflected in our classrooms, which still segregates students by ability, especially students with developmental disabilities. There's a gap in our understanding about what we know inclusive education to be, philosophically, versus what we understand and the importance of understanding inclusion in our practice. This is the question I'm trying to answer in my research, is how can we find the value in the day-to-day practice in our classrooms in terms of inclusive education? So how am I going to explain this to you? Now I can sit here and try and describe this, or we could have a little bit more fun. Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to. The kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with universal design for learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we find this value of diversity in our classrooms between the students? This is not just important for the outside pins, but it's critical for every single one of us. And just think, all we need to do is change our aim. Look how bowling changed education.
UDL was born out of the concept of architecture. When physical access and supports were added to buildings, people who didn't traditionally require supports found those features useful, like ramps going into buildings and the cuts in the sidewalks. You can see from the pictures there, people started using those supports who didn't quote unquote need them. People pushing strollers, the automatic doors when you push your cart out of the grocery store, they just became really useful. And that grew into technology. Now you think about your iPhone, all of the voice text commands that you use on your phone, in your car. And my favorite one is the closed captioning feature that I use on my TV. When I watch all of the shows I watch, like Yellowstone or Downton Abbey, where someone has a thick accent, I can watch an episode one time and think, I got it. I know what happened. I can rewatch the show a second time with closed captioning and have a complete light bulb moment and say, whoa, I thought I knew what happened. But when I watch it with closed captioning, I realize I missed so much the first time. If I'd had closed captioning on, if I had just had that one accessibility feature turned on the first time, I'd have gotten so much more out of that episode. And if you think about how that applies to instructional concepts, If you add that one feature, make that feature accessible to all students, like the closed captioning for me on TV, how many of your students would have a light bulb moment and realize they got so much more out of the lesson just because it was available and they were able to use it and realized it helped? In all of the research that CAST did, they found that there are 3 areas of the brain that activate when a student is learning, and each area of the brain is in charge of 3 different types of learning and interacting with materials and receiving information and expressing information when a student is learning. The middle of the brain is activated when a student is trying to figure out why they should even do this, when they become engaged in a lesson. That's called the affective network. The back of the brain becomes activated when a student is perceiving information, when they receive your lesson and they're trying to decide, what is this? The front of the brain is activated when a student is trying to decide how they're going to do something, what they're going to do with it, how to interact with materials, and how to express what they know. That's called the strategic network. For the best learning to occur, each network should be activated during the progression of a lesson. The goal should not be to engage a student and then focus on representation and then focus on action and expression. The goal should be for learners to stay engaged, keep processing, and maintain expression. The team at CAST developed this framework that supports all 3 pathways of learning. It gives you a good reference to understand how to keep all 3 networks activated during a progression of a lesson. There's a PDF copy of this in the handouts and materials section of this module. The QR code will take you to an interactive copy of the framework where you can click on each checkpoint and it'll lead you to more research and information about each checkpoint. The affective network is activated from the mid portion of the brain, and it deals with the why of learning. It happens during the engagement of a lesson. We work on this for purposeful, motivated learners to stimulate their interest and motivation for learning. Remember that each network is activated during the progression of a lesson, and we try to keep those activated throughout the entire lesson. We know that we have to engage students with an emotional reason to learn. We have to get them interested, motivate them to persist, and then help them maintain effort when challenges arise. The recognition network is responsible for the what of learning. We know that students only remember what they pay attention to, so we can provide multiple methods to sense information, process it, and store it. We also know that students learn more and they learn faster based on how much information they already have about a subject. So knowing all of this, we can begin to produce those expert learners who are resourceful and knowledgeable about how they learn through presenting information through multiple means of representation. The strategic network is the planning portion of the brain. This network helps plan, initiate, coordinate, and monitor all purposeful actions. It's where executive function skills originate. This aids in the development of strategies that help identify goals, organize and develop plans, execute plans, monitor progress, and self-correct when we get off track. Take a minute to review this chart that dispels the myth that UDL is just differentiated instruction. UDL takes a proactive approach, knowing that there will be a lot of variability in students that come to your classroom. Differentiated instruction takes a reactive approach and retrofits a lesson for students that are in the margins, whether they're gifted or considered special education. It reacts to needs rather than anticipates them. As we continue to dive into the principles of UDL, it's essential to understand why this approach is so crucial for creating inclusive and effective educational environments. And to illustrate that, let's take a look at this graphic. In the first panel on the left,
we see 3 kids of different heights trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. Each of them is given the same size box to stand on. And while we think that this is an equal distribution of resources that seems fair, it doesn't really result in an equal viewing experience. The shortest kid still can't see over the fence, which highlights that identical support doesn't necessarily meet everyone's needs. Moving to the panel in the middle, we see the concept of equity. And here, the resources are distributed based on individual needs. The shortest person receives 2 boxes, the kid in the middle gets 1 box, and the tallest person gets nothing. And this tailored support ensures that all 3 kids can now see the game, and it demonstrates that equitable solutions address the unique needs of each individual and provides them with specific support that they require to achieve similar outcomes. But in the third panel, it almost seems too easy. We see an even more transformative approach. The barrier itself, the fence, is just removed entirely. It eliminates the need for different levels of support. In this scenario, everybody has an unobstructed view without any additional assistance. This represents the ultimate goal of UDL, where we're designing learning environments and educational systems that inherently accommodate all learners from the start, proactively removing barriers to access and participation.
This is what the UDL framework looks like. It might be handy to have a copy of this printed while you go through the module, or you could have a copy of it open in a separate tab. You can find a PDF version of this in your module. Remember that the goal of UDL is to create expert learners, and through the implementation of action and expression checkpoints, you'll be creating strategic and goal-directed learners. The goal of all of UDL is to create expert learners. Take a look at this video from Katie Novak. She's one of the leading practitioners in UDL, and she offers a great perspective on what UDL is as she explains it to students.
Hi everyone, I am Katie Novak and I am an educator and a UDL consultant. And you might be like, what on earth does UDL stand for? And it's really about universal design for learning. And it's this idea that as learners, we all need very, very different things. We learn in different ways, we need different materials to help us learn, and we share what we know in different ways. And when an educator provides a lesson that's universally designed, there's lots of different options and choices for us as learners to make decisions. And so I am here today to talk to you, students, about why UDL is so important for you and what it means to be an expert learner. Now, hear me out. You might be thinking like, school, like I'm either good at school or I'm not good at school. And that's all hodgepodge. It has nothing to do with being good at school. An expert learner is someone who knows how to learn and knows how they learn best. And this is something that you're going to need for your whole entire life, because I am telling you, when you leave school, there's going to be things that you want to know, and there's going to be things that you're going to want to learn how to do. And if you don't know how to learn, you're going to be kind of stuck, because right now, a lot of your learning might be supported by amazing, brilliant educators, and you kind of do what they tell you, and that's awesome. But here's the thing. When you get older, you're going to be kind of competing for jobs with robots, and robots are very good at doing what we tell them, and they can do it much quicker, and they don't make a big mess. And, you know, I have 4 kids, so believe me, I get it. So an expert learner is somebody who is like really, really motivated, okay? They have a goal and they're like, I want to get there. And all of you have goals already. You have dreams of what your future is going to look like. And you have to try to figure out how you're going to get there. And the reality is there's not one pathway to get there. There's lots of different ways you can get there, but you always have to remember what the goal is. And so when your teachers share, you know what, this is the goal. You're going to have to know, what the causes of the Civil War. You're going to have to be able to write an essay. That might seem like, well, that's not something that I super duper want to achieve. Not like my vision board, not like my life goals, but the practice of learning how to work towards a goal by being resourceful and by being really strategic will help you for your whole entire life. So when an educator gives you a goal, in a universally designed classroom, they would give you a number of options and choices. for how you're going to learn what you need to learn. And they might start off with a mini lesson, but then they're going to say like, would it be beneficial for you to learn from a video or by, looking at a textbook or by meeting with me in a small group? And the first time you get that option, you're going to want to throw a party because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I love videos. I'm going to watch videos. The question is, are videos a great way to help you to learn? Because as you get older, if you want to learn how to change a tire, or you want to learn to ski, or you really want to understand, why a virus spreads, like what we're dealing with right now with COVID-19, what you want to do is you want to know how you learn best. And so your teachers are going to give you options and choices, and you're going to do a little bit of trial and a little bit of error and a little bit of failure. And you're going to go through this process that a really, really great teacher named Mike Anderson calls choose, do, review. Okay, you're going to make your choice. When a teacher gives you options, you're going to make your choice. And you're going to do it based on what you feel like is going to best help you to meet that goal. So I might say, my husband Lon, he is choosing the book and I just want to sit near him. So I'm going to choose a book, and maybe I really, really struggle with reading. And so that might not be the best way to help me to learn. The other thing that's important is when you're making a choice, you really have to think of what the goal is. So if the goal is that you're going to write, okay, all of the choices are going to require you to write. But the question might be, do you need to see an exemplar? Do you need to see an example of what it's going to look like when it's done? Do you need to see a graphic organizer so you can better organize your ideas? Okay, you want to know what you need in order to be successful. And this requires you to choose. And then whatever you choose, you're going to try it. You're just going to do it. You're going to try it. You're going to commit to your choice. The most important part here is you're going to review. You're going to say, did the choice that I made allow me to get closer to the goal? Was it a good choice? If so, you have to keep making choices that are similar to that. And if it was not a good choice, that's good too. Now you know what doesn't work. You have to change your strategy a little bit. And let's say that you chose to watch a video and then you didn't remember anything. It might not be that watching a video is not a great choice. It might be that while you're watching the video, it's better to take notes, for example. So you have to try a lot of things. You're basically doing research on your own brain about how you are able to get the information that you need and then how you're able to express what you know. So in some ways, a lot of the times you might be thinking about like, tests. I have to do tests. And UDL is not about tests. Sometimes tests are a great way to measure that you've met a standard, but sometimes teachers are going to provide you with some other choices as well. And they're going to say, I need to know that you know the causes of a civil war. What's the best way for you to share that with me? Do you want to record a video? Do you want to make an infographic? Do you want to write an essay? And again, you might be like, I don't know. But here's the thing is someday in life, your boss or someone you love is going to say to you, can you explain to me that you know this? And you're going to go back into your expert learning brain and you're going to be like, boop, boop, boop. Oh, I know how I can do this really, really well. Okay, I know that this is an area where I can really express what I know. And I know what resources that I need to get prepared. And I know how I'm going to learn it. And then I'm going to reflect afterwards and ask for feedback and say, like, could I have done it any better? So that's what it means to be an expert learner. It doesn't mean that you're good at memorizing things. It doesn't mean that you're naturally a great writer or that you just love a certain subject. It means that you know the most about how you learn. And that might change over time. And you're always willing to try new things. And you're always willing to reflect and say, did this work for me or not? So the strategy that I'm teaching you is to make a choice, to do that choice, and then to review that choice. Did it work for you? And if it did, keep moving in that direction. And if it didn't, take another pathway. And that's what being an expert learner is all about.
You'll have some students who already have some of these expert learning skills, and you'll recognize them as strategic and goal-directed students. They can use effective learning strategies. They just already know them. They can organize their tools and materials. They know their strengths and their weaknesses, and they use those in their learning. These students also know how to abandon plans and strategies that don't work for them. Some of these students are resourceful, and they're knowledgeable about how they learn. They know how to activate their own prior knowledge and use that when learning new information. They recognize tools and resources that could be helpful in their learning, and they can transform these skills that are being learned into useful and meaningful knowledge. Some of the students are purposeful and motivated to learn. They focus on mastering skills, not just grades. They set challenging goals for themselves. They know how to sustain effort and persistence, and they know how to monitor and regulate the emotional reactions they have to setbacks and distractions. To fully understand what expert learning is, it might be helpful to understand what expert learning is not. A student who could benefit from the development of expert learning skills might be that student who knows all of the correct answers but still waits for you to tell them they're right or to give them the next steps. It's a student who thinks they need a really cute graphic organizer but gets stuck in all of the details of the organizer, doesn't know why they're doing it, gets slowed down by the organizer, and still gets the wrong answer. It's a student who might get angry or quit at the first sign of frustration or stress. It's a student who gets stuck in all of the details or never sees the details or misses the overall goal entirely. It's that student who just can't see the forest for the trees. Just a reminder of what UDL is not. It is not a checklist of things to do. You should consider UDL as a marathon, not a sprint. You should use the guidelines as a lens for identifying and eliminating barriers to students receiving and producing information. We like to work smarter, not harder. We like to work with current initiatives, not in addition to other initiatives. It's just a framework to produce positive student outcomes academically and behaviorally while improving teacher practices that are aligned with the current Mississippi Teacher Growth Rubric. The Mississippi Teacher Growth Rubric is your teacher evaluation rubric, and it states that your responsibility as a teacher is to know and understand the domains, the standards, and the indicators. You're also supposed to know and understand the observation process. You're supposed to prepare for the observation, and when you and your administrator identify an area in which you need to improve, you are to develop strategies to improve your teaching practice and then implement those strategies. You can see here from the Mississippi Professional Growth System that Level 3 practices are characterized by teacher-directed success, while Level 4 practice is described as students having ownership of learning and environments. It also states that students assume a large part of the responsibility for their success and their own learning. This is the very definition of UDL. So UDL will again enhance your teaching practice and help you move from Level 3 to Level 4. When your administrator conducts your teacher evaluation, they use standards from the Mississippi Professional Growth System, and they use the Teacher Growth Rubric. As I told you before, UDL aligns very closely with all of those standards, and I'll show you an example here. The Mississippi Teaching Standard on the left, number 2, lessons have high levels of learning for all standards, corresponds with the UDL guidelines on the right in that blue box. What you'll notice on the left is that many of those bullet points are the same for levels 3 and 4 for the teaching standard. The addition of that one bullet point in the red box is the only thing that differentiates level 3 from level 4. The UDL checkpoints on the right that are outlined in the red boxes are a direct alignment with that bullet point on the left in the red box. So you can see that the addition of the UDL checkpoints into your practice will be actionable steps that you can take to enhance your teaching practice.
So let's take a minute to review what you've learned in Module 1. We are going beyond just awareness of the principles and the guidelines for UDL, and we want you to start thinking about examples of how you could address each of these principles. As a reminder, there are 3 principles to UDL: engagement, representation, and action and expression. And here are just some of the main points made on the slides earlier in the presentation. Before you take the quiz, it would be helpful for you to think about examples of how to address each of these principles. What are examples and what are not examples? We also want you to really think about how UDL is highly aligned with the teacher growth rubric. Remember, that's your teacher evaluation system in Mississippi. The guidelines are especially aligned with level 4 teacher performance, but you can also see them in levels 3 as well. Just as a hint, before you take the end of module quiz, you may want to have a copy of the UDL guidelines, which are given on slide 19 in this presentation, because we're going to ask you about examples of the UDL guidelines in the teacher growth rubric. All right, so this is the end of Module 1. Thank you again to Dr. Paige Davis for giving us that review overview slides. And I want just to remind you that you will need to take the check-in quiz at the end of the module. On the previous couple of slides, I gave you some hints about what you might need to do to be successful. A score of 70% or higher is necessary to unlock the next module. But, another thing you might want to do is go back to the introduce yourself discussion and see if you can find anyone who's responded to you, anyone else who is there from your school or district, or even someone from another school or district who teaches the same grade or subject that you teach. Thank you for your participation, and we will see you in Module 2, where Dr. Shanna Middleton will take over.